Massive blackouts have just taken place across Portugal and Spain, with houses and businesses going dark, planes and trains grinding to a halt, ATMs and payment systems becoming useless, and civilization as we know it ceasing to exist for about 10 hours. According to the authorities, these blackouts were caused by a rare atmospheric phenomenon, and it's proved something that I first began warning of in 2021. Our civilization is way more fragile than we think it is, and all it would take is a repeat of something like the Carrington Event of 1859, or any one of a dozen other kinds of space weather phenomenon, and life as we know it would collapse, which means that for most of us, our lives would end. Now that might sound doom and gloom, but events like this do happen. They will happen again. And whilst a localised event like the one last night in Spain can be recovered from in a matter of hours or just a few days at worst, a more widespread event could take out the grid for weeks, at which point it might as well be gone forever, because the vast majority of us literally cannot live without the grid. I hate to say that this is a life or death video, but that is exactly what it is. And you need to have a think about what you would do if what happened in Spain the other night happened here tonight. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to understand the world as it changes around us. Now, I first warned in a live stream in 2021 that our wonderful modern civilized lives are way more vulnerable than we want to believe they are, because our modern lives are 100% enabled by the miracle of the electricity grid. That is a miracle that is way more fragile than we can imagine. And that might surprise you. After all, the infrastructure is enormous. The towers are skyscrapers. The actual power plants, they're massive. They're gargantuan. And here in Australia, blackouts are rare and short. We can flick a switch and on come the lights. The kettle boils, the telly works. How can all of this be enabled by something that I'm describing as fragile? Well, because as incredible as the grid is, and believe me, the engineering is mind-blowing and I can't wrap my head around it, it is nothing compared to the forces at work in our solar system and in our atmosphere. And the Carrington Event of 1859 proved that when the sun burps in our direction, our planet struggles to cope. Last night's blackouts in Europe illustrated just how fragile the system is when pitted against the power of nature. Because according to the authorities, all it took was some rapid changes in temperature to cause different parts of the grid to lose synchronization with each other, and the whole thing came crashing down. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I've been looking at this issue for a number of years now, so let me explain in layman's terms what they're talking about. Our grid uses a thing called alternating current electricity, which means that the electricity is constantly switching from positive to negative and back again 50 times every second. Don't ask me why. All I know is that for the purposes of transmitting power over long distances, that alternating current proved to be better than the direct current, which is the other way of doing it, because engineers, that's why. So our electricity has a frequency of 50 hertz positive to negative and back again. And the whole grid needs to be in sync, or they'll start to cancel each other out and create serious issues, quickly collapsing the power right across the entire grid. The thing is, though, our power grid is made up of multiple different power sources and power stations. And actually, we're adding more solar panel farms and wind farms. We're adding new sources of generation that all need to be in sync. And that power is then transmitted over thousands of kilometers, and every single piece of the puzzle needs to be in sync with every single other piece. If a power station loses that synchronization, it will have to disconnect from the grid, usually automatically and pretty much instantly, to protect itself and the grid from a complete collapse. And it can't come back online until it is back in sync. That 50 times per second cycle has to be exactly lined up with the rest of the grid. Now, for reasons which I don't understand, because I'm not an engineer, rapid fluctuations in atmospheric temperature caused different parts of the grid in Spain and Portugal to go out of sync with each other. And bam, everything goes black. Just because the weather changed too fast. That is what I mean when I say that it is way more fragile than we think. Now, I'm not dissing the engineers who make this magic happen. I think the power grid is a modern miracle, and those people's brains, those engineers, are well above my pay grade. But we take that thing for granted way more than we should. And this is by no means the first time that such a thing has happened. What prompted me to first warn about it in 2021 was a massive winter storm in Texas. The storm itself didn't take out the grid, but because Texas is not prepared for such extreme cold and their power stations are not winterized the way that power stations further north are, they had to shut their power stations down because ice was forming in the cooling ponds for their nuclear reactors. Yeah, that could cause a problem. So again, it was just the weather. Although the mechanism was very different between the Spain and Texas situations. The whole of Texas went dark for a few days instead of just a few hours, and in fact parts of Texas didn't get their power back for over a week. They were two very different events, but fundamentally they were both just weather. In Texas, hundreds of people died, some from the cold, but many from actually just being unprepared and being forced to go out of their house looking for water or food or energy or heating. They died on the roads. They died of exposure. Sadly, numerous died from carbon monoxide poisoning because they used outdoor stoves and barbecues inside their homes to warm themselves up, gassing themselves and their children to death. The official death toll was 276 people, but the excess deaths in that particular week exceeded 700 people, killed because the grid went down during a big winter storm. But even so, that's still not the big one. Because Texas is surrounded by the rest of the US to the north, which operates off a separate grid which is winterized, so it could cope with the storm, and then they had Mexico to the south, which didn't lose its grid in the first place. And between the two of those, there was lots of emergency support quickly flooding into Texas and saving lives. But what if that wasn't the case? What if something like a massive solar flare, like the 1859 Carrington Event, took out the grid right across the continent, perhaps across the entire hemisphere, which is then impacted by that same solar flare? Now, yeah, it would have to be a pretty intense solar flare to take out the grid, but it wouldn't have to be an unprecedented one, because in 1859, before anyone really understood what solar flares were and what they could do, a solar flare now known as the Carrington Event struck Earth. The aurora from all that energy in the atmosphere from that solar flare became so bright that it could be seen south of San Francisco in California. In northern areas, it was so bright that the birds woke up during the night and began chirping, and people began to get up and get ready for work, thinking that the sun was rising. The amount of electrical energy in the atmosphere wasn't measured, of course. We didn't have a way to do that back then. But it must have been immense, because the only significant electrical infrastructure in existence at that time was the telegraph system, with wires acting like antennae stretching right across the North American continent. And we have records of telegraph operators sending messages to each other, and they're commenting, tapping away, sending their Morse code messages, laughing about how amazing it was that they were sending messages to each other over long distances without plugging in their batteries. You see, normally in order to energize the system and send that message, they had to wire in their battery. But now, they could just start tapping, and the energy that was already in the wires from the atmosphere carried the signals. In one case, the energy was so intense that it caused sparks inside the telegraph hut and burnt it down. Think about that. Such intense electrical energy in the air that it causes sparks and burns down a hut. Do you think that your smartphone would survive being in an atmosphere like that? Your PC? What about all the microchips in all of the infrastructure that we depend on for our daily lives? The computers that run all of that infrastructure? Sure, the massive transformers and towers used in the grid would be 100% okay. But the computers that are used to control, monitor, and manage all of that, would they survive? And if they don't survive, would you survive? My objective here is not to spread fear. But on the other side of fear, it's also dangerous to be naive. Modern life is wonderful, fantastic. I would not want to trade it for any other time in history. But we are also very vulnerable. Now, that's not what's dangerous. What's dangerous is that most of us don't know that we're vulnerable. We don't know how often Carrington events happen. Was that 1859 event a one-off, never to be repeated in all of the future of human history? Or can we expect another one sometime? Perhaps soon. We don't know. And the one thing that's worse than not knowing is not knowing but acting like it's fine. Think back to the COVID lockdowns and how wildly people were willing to fight for toilet paper. What if the grid were down? And with the grid went not just the lights and the heating and the mobile phone towers, but also all of the payment systems, the water pumps and purification for your tap water, natural gas as well as petrol pumps, and probably your car's engine management computer as well. Nothing works. Suddenly. Most people don't have enough water in their home to last one day. Maybe they have 2 days if they drink all the soft drink, before they're having to brush their teeth with a bottle of wine because that's all they have left to drink. Most people might have some food in the cupboard, but they depend on water and energy from the tap and the grid to be able to cook it and make that food edible. So that food won't do them as much good as you might expect if the grid were to go down. How many hours would it be before the first fight in a supermarket as it gets stripped bare by panicking looters? How many hours before those shelves are empty and people with hungry and thirsty children are looking for some way, any way, to bring food and water home? How long before survival of the fittest takes hold and the streets become completely unsafe? Again, I'm not trying to fearmonger. The only reason this didn't happen literally last night in Spain is because their blackout was a localized issue that could be fixed within a day or so. So the only reason this scenario hasn't already happened and isn't in fact happening right now in Spain and Europe is because that weather event was localized. Our entire civilization is currently betting its existence on the belief that the weather can't get any worse or more widespread than what it already is, that what happened on the Iberian Peninsula couldn't happen, for example, to the whole of Europe, that the conditions that caused the grid to go down couldn't possibly persist and stop the grid from coming back up for a few days or even a week at a time. The truth is that we have no idea what our sun or what our weather is capable of. We don't know what a 1 in 1,000 year solar storm looks like or does. And given that electrified life filled with microprocessors has only existed for about 50 years, it might only take a 1 in 100 year solar storm to take it all down. We don't know. The purpose of this video is to simply alert you, hopefully to get you to take a serious look at your own situation and ask yourself what you would do in a 10-hour blackout. What about a 24-hour one? What about a 3-day blackout with no running water, electricity, or gas? And by the way, if there's no running water, that means you can't flush your toilet for a second time. Think about that for 3 days. Modern life is a wonderful thing, and I am all for making the most of it and enjoying all that it has to offer, but don't be naive. The grid is not unbreakable, and the forces of nature are powerful enough to overwhelm it easily. I'm not suggesting that we should all become doomsday preppers, but last night's events in Spain are a wake-up call. It appears, thankfully, that they will have a happy ending. Power is being restored and all is well that ends well. But there is no guarantee that next time they or we will be so lucky. I covered this issue a little bit in my Getting Your Head in the Game masterclass. That's not what that course is about, not by a long shot, but I do touch on it during week 6, including touching on direct practical precautions and suggestions which I think we should all take immediately so that we have at least some resilience against life's uncertainties. But there are a lot of other resources out there online that can help you to make a simple plan and to give yourself and your family some resilience, some options, the ability to stay where you are and be okay for a few days should something like what happened in Spain happen to us tomorrow. And if you'd like me to dedicate some time to breaking this issue down further, including what I suggest we should all do and what to prioritize and how to approach it, what pitfalls to avoid and how to build a community with other similarly prepared people, then I'd be happy to spend more time covering it. Now, you can get the basics from week 6 of my masterclass. That's available at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. But also, if you let me know in the comments that you'd like me to go deeper, then I'd be happy to spend more time on the subject here on YouTube and perhaps even make a future masterclass dedicated just to that. But at a minimum, please take this as fair warning that the modern lives we take for granted are far more fragile than we want to believe. You need to be prepared, at least to some degree. And you need to be prepared for the fact that the people around you will not be prepared. Again, I'm not talking doomsday prepper stuff. I'm talking about simple, discreet, sensible and not particularly expensive preparations which will ensure that you can stay put while the world around you goes nuts for a few days. And at the very least, it makes sure you won't have to go desperately searching for basics after only a day or two while every other idiot out there is also looking for the same thing. Just think about it. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to be aware of what's happening and what those events around the world might mean for you. If you found this interesting or thought-provoking, then please head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, grab a copy of my books, my t-shirts, my DVDs, and you'll be helping me not only to keep doing what I do here on YouTube, but also you'll be helping me to take the precautions that I need to take to ensure that my family is also ready for the events that we're talking about, like what happened in Spain last night. So I really appreciate your support. Please like, comment, subscribe, check out this recommended video from YouTube, and as always, stay free.